Before Catherine Diaz ever understood competition, rankings, sponsorships, or Olympic qualification, she understood mornings. Mornings belonged to the ocean. The Diaz family lived close enough to the coast that the sound of waves entered the house before sunrise. The Pacific along this stretch of El Salvador has a particular quality in the hours before full light. A low, rhythmic percussion against volcanic rock that is felt as much as heard. A sound that moves through walls and through sleep and through the first moments of waking consciousness before any rational thought arrives to name it. Some mornings the sound was soft and distant, a gentle suggestion of the water beyond the streets and the dust and the neighbors' roosters. Other mornings, it hit the shoreline hard enough to rattle the window frames faintly while everyone was still asleep, as if the ocean were knocking to remind the house that it was still out there, still moving, still waiting for someone to come meet it. Catherine grew up inside that rhythm, the way a person grows up inside a language, not consciously learning it, but absorbing it through repetition until it becomes part of how the world is understood. Her father was a man who moved early and quietly. He had the deliberate economy of motion that fishermen and farmers develop when they've spent enough years working before other people wake up, when darkness is not the end of the day, but simply a different condition that the day passes through. He was not a surfer himself, but he respected the ocean in the particular way that people who make their living near it respect it. Not romantically, not recreationally, but with the specific attention of someone who understands that the thing he's respecting could kill him if he gets complacent. Along the coast of La Libertad, the Pacific fed families and drowned fishermen and occasionally swept away boats that their owners could not afford to replace. It brought tourists and destroyed docks and opened economic opportunities that barely existed elsewhere in the country. People respected it the way farming communities respect drought, not as an abstraction, but as a physical force that shaped the difference between stability and disaster. Catherine's mother, whose patience with sand tracked into the house was legendary, and whose enforcement of homework before surfing was absolute, was the center of gravity around which the household organized itself. She was the one who made sure that the ambitions of 3 older children, and eventually a youngest, didn't completely consume the ordinary structure of family life. Meals, school, responsibilities, the maintenance of a house where surfboards were always leaning against something and wet towels occupied every available chair. The Diaz children were 4: Giovanni, Erica, Jose, and then Catherine, the youngest. By the time she was old enough to understand what surfing was, her siblings were already competing around El Salvador. João was the oldest and most serious about competition. Erica surfed with a naturalism that people noticed, a quality of ease in the water that suggested someone born close to it. Jose, almost everyone called him Bamba, was the one who most shaped Catherine's relationship with the ocean, partly because of his talent and partly because of his personality, which was patient and observant and occasionally willing to make things up entirely when pressed for explanations he didn't have. At 6 years old, she followed them everywhere. Not gracefully. She slipped constantly on wet rocks near the shoreline and hated being left behind when the older kids paddled out. Sometimes she sat on the beach angry for entire mornings because conditions were considered too dangerous for someone her size. "You're too little," Erica told her once. "I'm not little. You cried because a crab touched your foot yesterday." "That's different." "You screamed." "It surprised me." Jose laughed so hard he nearly dropped his board. Katie glared at all of them from the sand while hugging her knees dramatically. 5 minutes later, she was chasing hermit crabs again. Jose, Bamba, noticed early that his youngest sister paid attention differently than most children around the water. This is worth being precise about, because it's easy to look backward at someone who became extraordinary and see significance in everything from the beginning. That's not what this was. There was no obvious prodigy quality, no moment where observers gasped at a 6-year-old's precocious genius. What Bamba noticed was something quieter and harder to name. It was attention. Not talent yet. Attention. Some kids wanted the feeling of standing on a board, the sensation, the rush, the physical achievement of not falling immediately. Others liked the identity of surfing, the way it looked in photographs or the way older surfers were treated in town. Some liked the social world of the beach, the gathering, the belonging. All of these are legitimate reasons to start surfing. None of them are what Bamba noticed in his youngest sister. Katie seemed genuinely interested in the ocean itself. She watched waves with a focus that was almost analytical. She studied where experienced surfers positioned themselves before sets arrived. She noticed how they conserved energy between waves instead of paddling constantly. She paid attention to tide shifts, current lines, wind direction, the sections of reef where waves suddenly changed shape. She was, in a meaningful sense, reading the water rather than just enjoying it. Sometimes she asked exhausting questions. Why did that one close out? Why did he move farther outside before that set? Why did everyone paddle left when the bigger one came? How come the wave broke different that time? Bamba answered most of them patiently. He had grown up in these waves and understood them the way he understood the route home. Not theoretically, but through his body, through repetition, through the accumulated information of thousands of hours in the water. Explaining what he knew instinctively was harder than knowing it, and he sometimes got tired. "The ocean is angry today," he told her once, simplifying. "That's not real." "How do you know?" "Because yesterday you said the ocean was happy." Bamba shrugged. "Maybe it changes moods." Katie narrowed her eyes suspiciously. He would still be laughing about that exchange years later. The first real surfboard placed beneath her feet was chosen mostly for stability, a longboard, the kind beginners learn on because the additional volume is forgiving of the constant errors that define early surfing. The conditions that morning were manageable. Small rolling waves near shore, cloudy sky, weak offshore wind. The kind of morning that looks slightly gray and ordinary and is in fact ideal for learning things. She wiped out almost immediately. Not a dramatic wipeout involving height or violence, just the quiet, instant failure of a body not yet calibrated for the task. The board slid sideways. She disappeared beneath whitewater. When she surfaced, hair covering her face, she looked shocked for a moment that lasted about half a second. Then she started laughing. "Again," she said. Bamba pulled the board back toward her. "You sure?" "Yes." "You just got destroyed." "I know." "You want to cry first or later?" "Shut up." She paddled back out. By the end of that morning, she had managed to stand for less than 2 seconds before falling again. That tiny moment, the 2 seconds of standing, the feel of moving water beneath a board that was actually moving with her, changed something. Not immediately in some cinematic way. There was no dramatic declaration, no prophecy, no one standing on the beach announcing greatness. There was simply a little girl who suddenly wanted to spend every possible hour near the water, and a family that understood, at some level below rational decision-making, that this was not a passing phase. Her mother enforced structure. Homework before surfing, school before surfing, responsibilities before surfing. Katie accepted these rules, not because she agreed with the hierarchy they imposed, but because obeying them was the fastest path back to the ocean. She was competitive long before she was polished. That competitiveness appeared in strange ways at first. She raced boys older than herself, paddling back outside after waves, not because she could beat them, she usually couldn't, but because she refused to accept the idea that she shouldn't try. She became genuinely furious, losing tiny local heats where the prize was practically meaningless. Once, after finishing poorly in a youth contest near El Sunzal, she refused to speak during the entire drive home. Bomba finally looked over from the driver's seat. "You know you surf worse when you're angry." "I wasn't angry." "You're literally crying." "I'm sweating." "It's nighttime." Katie stared out the window stubbornly while everyone else in the car laughed. She was 9 years old. She was already the most serious person in the vehicle about the results. Money was always a factor, and anyone who tells the story of early Salvadoran surf culture without acknowledging that is telling a cleaned-up version designed for tourism brochures. Boards were expensive, genuinely significantly expensive relative to ordinary Salvadoran wages. A decent shortboard could cost more than some families made in 2 months. Fins disappeared and couldn't easily be replaced. Entry fees for regional contests accumulated. Travel to competitions in Nicaragua or Guatemala or Costa Rica involved transportation, lodging, meals, and fuel costs that required real planning and sacrifice. Katie learned early to care for her equipment with the specific attentiveness of someone who knows that what they're holding cannot be quickly replaced. She patched dings carefully, carried boards across rocks at angles that minimized contact, reused wax past the point where most surfers would have discarded it, kept contest jerseys folded and protected because losing one would be a problem. When international surfers passing through La Libertad gave away used gear, which happened occasionally because the surf world has its own informal economies of generosity, those moments mattered enormously to local kids. One Australian surfer handed Katie an old traction pad after noticing the worn condition of her board, crouching down to her level first. "You surf every day?" "Yes." "You skip school for waves?" "My mother would kill me." The man laughed. "Good answer." He meant it as a compliment. She meant it as a factual statement. By her early teenage years, people around La Libertad were beginning to notice something unusual. Not simply that she was talented, because plenty of young surfers showed flashes of talent that didn't develop into anything sustained, but that she seemed constitutionally incapable of accepting limitations as final. Once she committed to a wave, hesitation disappeared from her surfing almost entirely. She attacked sections that other surfers pulled away from. She recovered from mistakes aggressively rather than cautiously, paddling back into position almost before anyone on the shore had processed what had just happened. "She goes," one local surfer said quietly after watching her take off deep at Punta Roca during heavier conditions. It became her reputation early, passed through the small, interconnected world of the Salvadoran surf scene the way reputations move in small communities. Through observation, through simple language, through people who watch carefully and say little. She goes. The ocean often rewards that quality. Until it doesn't. But at 13, 14, 15 years old, fear still felt negotiable to her. The future remained enormous, elastic, full of movement. And despite everything that outsiders believed they understood about El Salvador, the gangs, the violence, the headlines, the travel warnings, the homicide statistics that appeared in foreign newspapers with the predictability of weather reports, Katie's version of the country still centered around dawn patrols, surfboards drying outside the house, fried fish near the port, volcanic sunsets, and the long Pacific horizon stretching beyond La Libertad toward something she hadn't been to yet, but fully intended to reach. The water came before the world's opinion of the country did.